It happened on a quiet Sunday morning in Atlanta, the day that changed Claire Matthews' life forever. Her mother-in-law, Janet, walked into the kitchen with anger in her eyes and a pot of boiling water in her hands. Claire had refused to divorce Ethan, her husband, and that one decision turned into something she could never forget. Claire once believed she had married a good man. Ethan was gentle, thoughtful, and made her feel safe. But his mother never accepted her. From the beginning, Janet made her feel like she didn't belong. She would criticize Claire's cooking, question her manners, and act like Claire had stolen her son. Claire tried to stay calm, hoping things would get better, but they only got worse with time. Janet became more controlling. She would show up at their house whenever she wanted, rearrange things in the kitchen, and even comment on what Claire wore. Ethan never stood up to her. He would say, "She's just being my mom," and that broke Claire a little more each day. Still, she tried to hold on, believing that love could fix their small family. One day, Claire found divorce papers on the dining table. Janet had met with a lawyer, pretending to act for Ethan. When Claire confronted her, Janet said, "You'll never be good enough for him." Ethan argued with his mother, but she twisted everything until he blamed Claire for the tension. The next morning, Janet returned, shouting about how Claire was turning Ethan against her. Claire tried to calm her down, but Janet's rage boiled over, literally. She grabbed the pot from the stove and threw it at Claire. The pain was blinding. Ethan drove her to the hospital, terrified. The doctors treated her burns, but nothing could heal how betrayed she felt. Janet lied, saying it was an accident. Ethan begged Claire not to go to the police, afraid of what people would say. That was the moment Claire realized she had been protecting everyone but herself. As she recovered, she started keeping records, pictures of her injuries, hospital files, messages from Janet. She began therapy and slowly regained her confidence. When Janet came again pretending to apologize, Claire secretly recorded her admitting that she only wanted to teach her a lesson. Claire's hands shook, but her voice didn't when she called the police that night. The case went to court. Janet denied everything, but the evidence told the truth. Claire stood before the judge, calm and strong, while Ethan sat behind her in silence. Janet was sentenced for assault, and Ethan finally saw the damage his silence had caused. Months later, Claire looked in the mirror. The scars were lighter, but they reminded her how far she had come. She moved to a new apartment and began helping other women rebuild their lives. Her revenge wasn't in the punishment, it was in her peace. The woman who once trembled in fear had learned to stand tall again, stronger than ever. Claire sat in silence, staring at the faint scars on her arm. They reminded her of the day her world changed forever, but they also reminded her of the strength she never knew she had. After the attack, she spent weeks in the hospital, struggling to sleep because every sound reminded her of that boiling water hitting her skin. Ethan visited often, quiet and distant, always looking guilty but never saying the words she needed to hear. When she was finally discharged, she returned to a home that didn't feel like hers anymore. The smell of the kitchen made her nauseous. Every corner reminded her of Janet's voice echoing in anger. Ethan tried to act normal, making dinner, watching TV, pretending life hadn't fallen apart. Claire couldn't do that. The silence between them was louder than the screams that day. She knew she couldn't live like a ghost. With every slow step of recovery, she started planning her next move. One night, while Ethan was asleep, she sat in bed scrolling through her phone, rereading old messages from Janet, cold words that now felt like clues. Claire began saving everything: photos of her burns, texts, medical reports. She wanted truth to be louder than excuses. Janet showed up again weeks later, holding flowers and a fake smile. Claire's hands shook, but she let her in. She placed her phone on the counter, recording. Janet's words spilled out without hesitation. She said she never meant to hurt her that bad, that she only wanted to scare her. Claire didn't cry this time. She simply nodded, her heart calm but steady. That night, she sent the recording to the police. Ethan woke up to the sound of officers knocking on the door. He stood there in disbelief while Janet was taken away, shouting that it was all a misunderstanding. Claire didn't look at her, she had looked at her pain long enough. When Ethan tried to stop her from filing the case, saying it would destroy his family, she said quietly, "Your mother did that, not me." The court days were long and painful. Janet's eyes burned with the same hatred, but Claire didn't let it break her again. She told her story clearly, showing every record and every scar. The truth was undeniable. The judge's verdict came with relief. Janet was found guilty. For the first time, Claire breathed freely. After the trial, Ethan moved out. There were no fights, just silence and the realization that their love couldn't survive what his silence allowed. Claire moved into a small apartment across town. She started volunteering at a women's shelter, meeting others who had faced the same kind of pain. She wasn't just healing anymore, she was helping others heal too. Every morning, when she looked at her reflection, she didn't see weakness or pity. She saw survival. Her scars no longer burned, they told her story of courage, justice, and freedom. Claire woke up one morning to a heavy silence in the apartment. Ethan was already gone for work, leaving a note on the table that simply said, "Be careful today." Those words used to sound caring, but now they felt hollow. Ever since his mother's arrest, he had been avoiding her eyes, speaking only when necessary. Claire didn't blame him anymore, she just felt numb. The trial had ended, but the noise in her mind hadn't. Reporters had moved on, neighbors had stopped whispering, yet the weight of what happened stayed with her. Every time she poured water into a pot, she hesitated for a second. Every time she smelled something boiling, her chest tightened. Healing wasn't quick, it came slowly, one small breath at a time. She spent her days at therapy and her evenings alone, reading or sitting on the balcony. Sometimes she would replay the past in her mind, not to relive it but to understand it. She realized that Janet's hate was never really about her. It was about control. Claire had simply refused to break, and that made her dangerous in Janet's eyes. That thought gave her a strange kind of peace. Weeks turned into months. One afternoon, Claire received a letter from the court confirming Janet's sentence extension for violating her bail conditions. Janet had tried contacting Ethan again from jail. Claire folded the letter neatly and placed it in a drawer. She didn't feel angry anymore, just done. Ethan came by that evening, looking tired and uncertain. He stood at the door for a moment, holding a small box. Inside was her wedding ring. "I think it's time we both moved on," he said softly. His voice shook, but his eyes were sincere. Claire nodded. There were no tears left to cry. She had mourned that marriage long before it ended. After he left, she sat on the couch, the ring resting on her palm. It didn't feel like loss, it felt like release. The apartment seemed brighter somehow. For the first time in years, it was completely hers. Claire started a new job at a counseling center downtown, helping women rebuild their confidence after abuse. Listening to their stories reminded her how far she had come. She didn't talk about her own past much, but people could sense strength in her calm voice. One day, as she was leaving the center, a young woman stopped her and said, "You give people hope." Claire smiled quietly. That was all she ever wanted, to turn her pain into something good. At night, she often sat by the window, watching the city lights fade into the distance. The scars on her arms caught the soft glow, no longer symbols of pain but of power. She whispered to herself, "I survived what was meant to destroy me." And in that quiet moment, she knew, her story wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about freedom. Claire adjusted to her new routine slowly. The mornings were quiet, filled with the smell of coffee and the sound of birds outside her apartment window. She liked the stillness now. There were no angry voices, no footsteps she feared, no tension waiting in the corners. It took her time to find peace in that silence, but every day she felt a little more like herself again. She had started volunteering more hours at the counseling center. Listening to other women talk about their pain helped her heal too. She never shared all the details of her own story, but her eyes told enough. People trusted her because she understood what real fear felt like. She helped them rebuild their lives the same way she had rebuilt hers, slowly, honestly, one day at a time. One afternoon, after a long group session, her coworker, a kind woman named Megan, asked if she wanted to go for coffee. It was a small thing, but it made Claire realize she hadn't done something simple like that in years. Sitting at the cafe, she smiled easily for the first time. The laughter felt strange but freeing. When she went home that night, she noticed the boxes still sitting in her closet. Inside were pieces of her old life, photos, letters, things she once thought she would never be able to look at again. She opened the top box and took out a picture of her wedding day. Ethan was smiling, his arm around her shoulders, both of them looking young and hopeful. For a moment, her chest ached. Then she placed the photo back and closed the box for good. A few weeks later, Claire decided to move to a smaller town outside the city. She wanted fresh air, quiet streets, and new faces. The move felt like closing the last chapter of a painful book. On her first morning there, she took a walk down the main street and stopped by a small bakery. The woman behind the counter greeted her warmly, and Claire felt something she hadn't in years, belonging. She began to paint again, something she had given up after the attack. The colors helped her express what words couldn't. Her paintings were full of light and soft shapes, images of peace and strength. She sold a few pieces at a local market, and people often told her they felt calm when they looked at them. She never told them the truth, that each painting was a piece of her healing. Months passed, and Claire's scars faded more. When she looked at herself in the mirror now, she didn't see pain or fear. She saw survival. Life had tested her in the cruelest way, but she had turned her suffering into something meaningful. One evening, as the sun set outside her new home, she whispered softly, "It's finally over." And for the first time, she truly believed it. Claire's new life in the small town slowly began to feel normal. The quiet streets, the fresh air, and the kind faces around her helped her breathe again. Every morning, she walked to the little park near her house, sat on the same bench, and watched children play. It became her favorite part of the day, a reminder that life could still be gentle after everything she had been through. She kept working at the counseling center, now handling more cases than before. Many women came to her in fear and confusion, just like she once had. She listened carefully, never judging, always patient. They trusted her because she didn't just speak from training, she spoke from truth. When they cried, she held their hands and told them, "You are stronger than you think." One evening, she received a letter from the correctional facility. It was from Janet. Claire stared at it for a long time before opening it. The words inside were unexpected. Janet apologized, admitting she had lost control and destroyed everything she once cared about. She wrote that prison had given her too much time to think, and that she finally understood the pain she had caused. Claire read it twice, then folded the paper neatly and set it aside. She didn't feel anger or satisfaction, just peace. She had already forgiven, not for Janet's sake, but for her own. Ethan reached out months later. He wanted to meet and talk. Claire agreed, more out of closure than curiosity. They met at a small diner halfway between their towns. He looked older, tired, and quieter. There was no blame in his voice anymore, just regret. "You didn't deserve any of it," he said softly. Claire nodded and smiled faintly. She didn't need to explain how she had survived, he could see it in her calmness. When they said goodbye, it felt final, but in a kind way. After that, Claire focused even more on her work. She began leading a weekly support group and painting in her free time. Her art grew brighter with each piece, soft blues, warm golds, peaceful whites. People started calling her, "the woman who paints hope." She laughed every time she heard that, but deep down, she liked the sound of it. One afternoon, a young girl in her group hugged her and said, "You helped me believe life can start again." That simple sentence brought tears to Claire's eyes. It was the kind of healing she had once thought impossible. As the months turned into a year, Claire stood on her porch one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in orange and pink. The wind felt warm against her skin. Her scars were still there, but they no longer hurt. They were a reminder, not of pain, but of strength. She whispered to herself, "I made it." And this time, it wasn't just survival. It was freedom. Claire's days had become calm and simple. She woke up early, opened the windows to let the morning air in, and made herself a cup of tea. The fear that once lived inside her had faded. Life had turned into something soft and steady, something she could finally trust. Every small thing she did now, watering her plants, folding laundry, walking to the park, felt like proof that she had built peace with her own hands. Her work at the counseling center had grown into something bigger. She was now in charge of a new program that helped women find jobs after leaving abusive homes. It was hard work, but it gave her purpose. When she talked to the women, she didn't speak like a counselor. She spoke like someone who understood the long road from pain to strength. They listened because she didn't offer pity, she offered proof that survival was possible. Sometimes, at night, she would sit on her porch and watch the stars. It was her quiet time, the moment when she talked to herself and thought about how far she had come. She didn't hate Janet anymore. Hate had taken enough from her already. Forgiveness wasn't easy, but it gave her peace. And peace was the thing she had fought hardest to find. Ethan hadn't contacted her again since their last meeting. She was grateful for that. There were no more memories to fix, no past to return to. She kept his old letters in a small box in her closet, not because she missed him, but because they were part of her story, a story that had shaped her but no longer defined her. On weekends, Claire joined a local art group. They met in a small studio filled with sunlight and color. She loved watching how paint could turn pain into beauty. Her hands moved with confidence now. She no longer painted darkness or fear. Her new paintings were full of light, flowers, open skies, and waves. People often asked what inspired her, and she would simply say, "Life, after it gets better." One evening after class, Megan told her that the center wanted to feature her story in their annual event. At first, Claire hesitated. She didn't want to relive everything, but then she thought about the women who came through their doors every week, scared, lost, unsure if they could start over. Maybe her story could help them believe they could. When the day came, she stood in front of a small crowd and shared her journey in her calm, steady voice. She didn't talk about anger or revenge. She spoke about courage, healing, and learning to love life again. The room was silent when she finished, then filled with quiet applause. That night, walking home under the streetlights, Claire smiled. She had come full circle, from pain to peace, from silence to strength. She whispered to herself, "This is my new beginning." Claire stood in front of the mirror, brushing her hair before leaving for work. The morning light coming through the window made her small apartment glow softly. She looked at her reflection and saw peace where fear used to be. Her scars had faded, but she still touched them sometimes, not out of sadness, but as a reminder of how strong she had become. Her life had turned into something she never thought possible. She had built a stable routine that gave her comfort. Work at the center was busier now. More women were joining the programs, and Claire was asked to lead a new project focused on recovery and rebuilding confidence. She accepted without hesitation. It felt like the next right step. Every day after work, she stopped by a small bookstore near the bus stop. The owner, an elderly man named Thomas, always greeted her with a kind smile. They talked about books and life in small, easy conversations. It was simple but meaningful. Claire realized she didn't need big gestures to feel connected anymore. Small kindnesses were enough. One Friday evening, as she was leaving the center, she saw a young woman sitting alone in the hallway, crying. Claire sat beside her quietly. The girl said her family had turned against her after she left an abusive relationship. Claire listened, then said softly, "Sometimes walking away is the hardest and bravest thing you'll ever do." The girl looked at her with tears in her eyes and whispered, "How did you survive?" Claire smiled gently and said, "By not giving up on myself." Those words stayed with Claire later that night. She realized she wasn't just helping others heal, she was continuing to heal herself through them. Their stories reminded her of who she used to be and how far she had come. As the months passed, her small apartment began to feel more like a home. She added new curtains, a few plants, and framed some of her own paintings on the walls. The air felt warm, filled with quiet life. She would sometimes paint late at night, soft music playing in the background, her heart calm and steady. One afternoon, she received an invitation from the city to display her artwork at a local gallery for community artists. It surprised her, but she agreed. On the day of the event, she stood among strangers who admired her work. A woman stopped by one of her paintings and said, "There's so much peace in this." Claire smiled and replied, "That's exactly what I wanted to show." As she walked home that night, holding the small program from the gallery, Claire felt proud. Not for what she had survived, but for what she had built after it. Her life was no longer about pain, it was about purpose. Standing on her porch, she looked up at the sky and whispered, "I made it through." And for the first time, she felt completely free. The night of the gallery event stayed in Claire's mind for weeks. It wasn't because of the compliments or the attention, but because of how peaceful she had felt standing there. For the first time, her story wasn't about pain, it was about growth. After that evening, she received a few requests to speak at community gatherings. At first, she wasn't sure if she wanted to. But deep down, she knew sharing her experience might help someone else find courage. She began speaking at small events, mostly at schools and women's centers. Her voice was steady, calm, and filled with truth. She didn't talk about the details of the violence or the fear, she talked about finding yourself again after losing everything. People listened in silence. Some cried, others came to her afterward to thank her. Each time, Claire walked away feeling lighter, as if the weight of her past was slowly fading. Her paintings started to reflect that change. She used more color, more light. Each piece carried a quiet message of hope. When she wasn't working or painting, she spent time in the park, sketching scenes of trees and people. It became her way of grounding herself, simple moments that reminded her how beautiful life could be when it wasn't filled with pain. One afternoon, while she was sketching, a little boy ran past and tripped near her bench. She helped him up, and his mother came rushing over, thanking her with a smile. They talked for a few minutes, and Claire learned the woman's name was Anna. Over time, they became friends. They started meeting at the same park every few days. It was a quiet, easy friendship that brought laughter back into Claire's days. As months passed, the counseling center grew busier. Claire helped train new volunteers and created a workshop to teach emotional recovery through art. She watched women paint their own stories, pain, survival, and rebirth, all through color and light. Each time she saw one of them smile again, she felt a small piece of her own. The morning sun touched Claire's face as she stepped outside her small house. The air was fresh and calm, and for the first time in a long while, she felt truly at peace. It had been months since she learned that Janet was out of prison, yet not once had she looked over her shoulder. Fear no longer controlled her life. She had already faced the worst and survived. Now, everything after that felt like freedom. Her days followed a gentle rhythm. She went to work at the center, stopped by the art studio afterward, and spent her evenings reading or painting near the window. The walls of her home were filled with her artwork, bright colors, open skies, and calm seas. Each painting told a story of healing, and together they created a world that was full of life again. Claire's friendship with Anna grew deeper. They often met at the park with Anna's son, sharing coffee and laughter. It felt good to have someone who treated her like a normal person, not someone broken by her past. One afternoon, Anna invited her to a small dinner at her home. Claire hesitated but finally agreed. That night, surrounded by warm light and soft music, she felt something she hadn't felt in years, a sense of belonging. At work, Claire began mentoring younger counselors. She was proud of how far she had come, not just as a survivor but as someone others looked up to. The center trusted her with sensitive cases, and she always handled them with calm understanding. Her strength was quiet but steady, something that gave hope to everyone around her. One day, while cleaning her desk, she found an old notebook filled with journal entries from the time after the attack. She read a few lines and felt tears in her eyes, not from sadness, but from gratitude. She no longer recognized the woman who had written those words of fear and pain. That woman had fought hard to become the person she was now. Claire closed the notebook and placed it back in the drawer. Some stories didn't need to be reopened. As spring arrived, the city held a community fair, and the art group invited Claire to display her paintings again. She hesitated at first, but when she saw her name on the flyer, she smiled. At the fair, people admired her work, asking about the meaning behind each piece. She simply said, "They're about finding light after darkness." A few people nodded quietly, understanding more than words could explain. That evening, Claire walked home under the soft glow of streetlights. The sound of laughter and music from the fair drifted behind her. She thought about the woman she used to be and the woman she had become. The past was still part of her, but it no longer defined her. As she reached her porch, she looked up at the night sky and whispered, "Thank you for this piece." She smiled, knowing this was what real healing felt like, quiet, honest, and her own. Claire sat on the porch steps, watching the evening sky fade from gold to soft gray. The air smelled of rain, and the wind carried the sound of laughter from a nearby street. She closed her eyes and took a slow breath. Life was finally quiet, the way she had always wanted it to be. The pain that once filled her days had turned into something distant, almost like an old dream she could finally let go of. Her life was simple now, but it felt full. She spent her mornings at the center, her afternoons painting, and her evenings walking through the town. The small routines brought her comfort. Each day felt steady, not dramatic or painful, just peaceful. It had taken her a long time to reach this point, but now she woke up every morning feeling grateful that she had survived and found a reason to live again. The women at the center often came to her for advice. They called her Miss Claire, a title that made her smile. She didn't see herself as special, but to them, she was proof that broken lives could be rebuilt. She taught them to take one step at a time, to find small joys in ordinary days, and to never forget their worth. Every time she saw a woman smile again after weeks of tears, Claire felt like she had found her true purpose. One afternoon, she returned home from work and stood in front of one of her paintings, a bright staircase surrounded by golden light. It reminded her of everything she had been through and how she had climbed her way back up from the darkness. She touched the edge of the canvas and whispered softly, "I made it." Later that week, the local newspaper published an article about her art exhibit and her work with survivors. People started visiting the center, inspired by her story. Some even left letters thanking her for giving them courage. Claire read each one quietly, feeling a warm peace settle inside her. She didn't need recognition, but it felt good to know her pain had turned into something that helped others. One evening, as she walked home through the park, she stopped to watch the sunset. The sky was filled with orange and pink clouds, glowing softly over the trees. A little girl nearby pointed at the colors and said, "It looks like hope." Claire smiled at that. She knew exactly what the child meant. When she reached home, she made herself a cup of tea and sat by the window. The city lights flickered outside, calm and steady. She thought about all the nights she had cried in fear, all the mornings she had forced herself to start over, and how each one had led her here. Claire didn't think about revenge anymore. She thought about peace, freedom, and the quiet joy of simply living. As she looked out into the night, she whispered, "This is my happy ending." And this time, it truly was.